talk through our current project, the Former Girls Charity School in Edmonton, and our lead consultant for this project, Nicola, has very kindly agreed to talk a little bit at the end. So once I finish my presentation, I'm going to hand the floor over to Nicola to give her view as the lead consultant, and I've told her she can be candid as she might like about our project. Oops. So I just want to start explaining a little bit about where we are in our project and what I'm going to talk about now. So we're starting right here at the absolute beginning when we were first introduced to the site, and we're really springboarding, thinking from the basis of our own trust vision through to where we are now, which is having completed our options appraisal, and we're now establishing our project vision and using that as the basis to secure funding for development stage on the project. And I've just tried to show this in the context of the three major sort of development heritage project stages: the viability, development, and delivery and capital stages. But I also just wanted to show the sandwiching bits at either end. So there's this bit at the beginning, you're identifying a project, you're building relationships. And this in itself is a really important stage, particularly when thinking about the vision of your project. And then of course, at the other end of your sandwich is your period when the building is in use, which actually is the biggest bit of your project really. And down at the bottom, I've just put a really useful resource, which is the Heritage Trust Network Toolkit, and it's a breakdown of project timescales. And I think perhaps the most useful overview of the different stages of a project, what you should be doing when, and how long each is going to take you. Now, to look at our project, I just want to provide a little context. So where is our school? It's in Edmonton, which is in the North London borough of Enfield, down here in the southeast corner of the borough. It is the most deprived ward in Enfield, and it's within the top 10 deprived boroughs in all of England. And to zoom in a little bit further into Edmonton Green itself, right here in the middle of the map is Edmonton Green Station. This is the main transport hub for the area. Over on the left-hand side, you've got All Saints Church, which is a lovely medieval church on the Heritage at Risk Register. And over on the right-hand side, you have Edmonton Green Shopping Centre, which is a major redevelopment of Edmonton in the 1970s. Along here, you have Church Street, and on Church Street is our little site here. This is our charity school. Now, the context of your project is always incredibly important and really important to understand when you're starting at a project. So I just want to take you back to 1936 quickly. And this is a map of Edmonton Green before the major development. And you can see here on the right-hand side of that map, what looks like it might be a lovely historic core. And to look at it here, you've got Edmonton Green itself, lovely historic centre, lots of shops. And this is what it looks like now. This is as a result of that major development. It's obliterated the historic core of Edmonton, and if you ever have the pleasure of going there, you'll find it a particularly unpeople-friendly and unnavigable bit of landscape. Now, if we step back and look at that in the context of our site, on the right here, this is one of Nicola's photographs of the view along Church Street. On the right is our charity school site. And looking down what is now the remnant of a historic town centre towards that major development. And there's a clear delineation by the railway line at the end between the old core of Edmonton, what's left of it, and the new end. And there's very little connectivity between the two. There's little to drive people into this historic part of Edmonton Green. So to actually focus in on our site, and it is in fact two buildings which are linked, and it's this here. This is the Former Girls Charity School building itself, and next to it is the Mistress's Cottage. Both of these buildings are Grade 2 listed. They're within the Church Street Conservation Area, and both the buildings and the conservation area are on the Heritage at Risk Register. Now, I don't have a time to take you through the buildings on a tour, but there is a virtual tour on our website. So if you do want to have a walk around the buildings and learn more about their history, then please go there and do that. Instead, I'm just going to talk through the building development, and it's a very breezy background, I'm afraid. The building that you see now was built in 1793, but the foundation was actually established in 1787. I feel like I've got the date wrong, Nicola, 1778. And an original building was built in 1784 over the road, but it was far too noisy for the landowner, a chap called Obadiah Legrue, who then gifted this land on the other side of the road, and the current building was built there. And the end of that parade of buildings was carved off to create a Mistress's Cottage. And it's important to note that at this time, the actual ownership problems became very complicated, and they've remained difficult to the current day, because Obadiah was filling the charity finances, and there was a legal case quite quickly after this period, and very little documentary evidence about the ownership survives. So just to look very quickly at the original layout of the hall, you've got a fairly small little school building and a single room on the first and second floors of the schoolmistress's cottage. And then in 1827, the building was extended to the rear, so the hall was made a little larger, and an additional room was built on the first and second floor of the mistress's cottages. And then there was a further extension in 1894 with the second classroom built at the back of the main hall. And this floor plan is absolutely as it survives today. There's been very little alteration. So from 1793 through to 1902, the building was used as a charity school, and it provided education to poor girls from the local area. But in 1902, the Education Act resulted in the closure of the school in 1904. And there was a bit of a period between 1904 and 1913 when there was lots of discussion and debate between the Foundation and the Education Authority about what to do with this building. And that culminated in a scheme in 1913, which created two new foundations. The first, the Girls' Sunday School Foundation, became the owning foundation of the site, and another foundation, the Girls' Special Instruction Foundation, became a sort of operating foundation, and they ran a charity Sunday school there. So over the course of the 20th century, it was in very loose use as a charity hall, and it was managed with a custodian who lived in the former mistress's cottage, who ran the community activity at the site. But in 2012, the building had deteriorated to such a condition that it simply wasn't viable to be used for community use anymore, and the building became redundant, and the custodian moved out. At that time, Enfield Council undertook an options appraisal that was funded by the then English Heritage, now Historic England, which did identify preferred use, but actually that didn't come to fruition for a variety of reasons. So the building was empty and deteriorating considerably between 2012 and essentially through to now. But, I'm going to bring us up to the point where our trust got involved. Oops, sorry. Which is in September 2018. So we meet with Historic England on an annual basis and go through the Heritage at Risk Register and identify potential cases where we can offer support. And this was flagged to us by Historic England. So on the back of that meeting, we set up a site visit in November 2018 with Historic England, the Heritage Projects Manager at Enfield Council, and the sole trustee of the owning foundation, because by this point, both foundations had essentially become redundant. And there was one trustee who was the parish priest of All Saints Church, who had sort of ended up with liability for the buildings. Now, after this initial meeting, there was a little bit of a gap, and this was really to digest the outcome of that meeting and thinking about how our trust might be able to support the project. So after that sort of digesting period, we convened then in July 2019, which was then to form our sort of key stakeholder group who were informing on this project, and that was represented by us, Historic England, Enfield Council, the Diocese of London, who are offering support to the trustee, the Enfield Society, and of course the trustee himself. And crucially at this meeting, it was decided that our trust would take forward a viability stage study to think about the future of this site. So between that period and May 2020 was the period when we developed our project. We put grant applications into the Architectural Heritage Fund and the Heritage Fund, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the second talk. And we also, in parallel to this, started to try and resolve the ownership position, which is an ongoing and very tricky thing in its own right. So we secured the funding, which was great, and we started to get off the ground the options appraisal. Then the pandemic struck and there were some delays, but we decided to progress with the project. And that eventually kicked off in May 2020 and then carried on through to January 2021. So we're not that far out of this bit of the process. And on the back of that, our trustees met, looked at the outcome of that, and felt that this was a project that we wanted to progress and start to test the fundability of that project. And in parallel, we're continuing to resolve the ownership position. Now, when we first went to the site, there was some sort of simple questions that we first wanted to ask. And the first of this being, why is the site at risk? The fundamental basic question, what's the difficulty here? And of course, this is an interlinked series of problems which together are extremely difficult to resolve. So the first of these is the ownership. I've explained that's extremely complicated. There's very little paperwork related to this site. The use, obviously, there is no use. There's no sense of how it can be used at the present. The management is linked to the ownership, but there's no money or capacity to manage the site, which is leading on to the condition is deteriorating. Accessibility is really problematic. It can't be used in its community in any sort of community way because there's no accessibility at the site. Money, that the owning foundation hasn't got the money to deliver a capital project, and it's also an unincorporated charity, so it's not in a position to access the funding that it needs. But even still, it doesn't have the capacity to deliver this kind of project. And then, of course, there's no vision. There's a complete lack of vision. There's a will to do something, but no sense of what it is that needs to be done. And we look at these together, and these are all the challenges of our project. And at this point, you might think, if you're facing all these challenges, why on earth would you want to think about a project? Well, in the same way that there are lots of interlinked problems, there are lots of interlinked motives that would lead us towards committing to running a project here. Absolutely at the core of that is our charitable objectives. So reusing historic buildings in London for the benefit of people is absolutely the crux of what we want to do. There's a key group of stakeholders who are really active and wanting to resolve this site. So there's a lot of support for a project here. I mean, they're both at-risk buildings, so there's an absolutely clear sense of urgency to do something at this site. There's clear local needs that a good community facility is definitely needed in the local area, which links onto social impact. There's an opportunity to deliver social impact here through the reuse of these buildings. Our trust, we're an established building preservation trust. We have the capacity to access the kind of funding that is needed for a project here. And we have the capacity, as Hannah said, we've got capacity grant funding from Historic England. We have project staff. We have the time to give to this challenging site, and then to bring us back to what Rosie was talking about, which is our trust vision. And of course, this is a kind of project that will enable us to deliver on our trust vision. And so we look at all of these as the opportunities of our project. I won't repeat our vision, but just to sort of build on what Rosie was talking about, you know, we're coming at it from the direction of heritage. We're a building preservation trust, but when we're thinking of a heritage project, it's not just about the building, it's also about the use. And it was interesting to hear from the Refugee Support Network last week, because they're coming at it from the other side. They're coming at it having a clear vision for use, but not a sense of the heritage aspects of their problem. And so what's really important is to consider these things holistically. It's about your building and it's about how it's used. So to come on to the issue of visioning, so obviously when we're starting at the beginning of this project, we don't have a project vision, but what we do have is our own trust vision. We have this vision through reusing heritage for social benefit. And so we embedded this vision, our vision for Heritage Regenerative Project into all stages of the viability project going forward. And so the first way that we did that is to clearly identify it in our consultant and project team brief. So it's absolutely clear to the team that that's what we want to achieve. And I just copied and pasted the objectives from our two briefs, our lead consultant brief and our business planner and community consultant brief here. And you can see that we've been extremely explicit in that, you know, we want this project to explore ways that they can have the capacity to deliver, once again, community benefit and social provision. So our project team is clear that we're not going out to make lots of money. This isn't a commercial project here. We want something that's financially viable, but also socially impactful. Now, at the outset of our project, our business planner led on a strategic project objectives and defining these. Now, these objectives became the absolute building blocks of our project. And I just want to read them out to you because I think they're quite important to understand how these fed through all the other stages of our options appraisal project. So we looked at our environmental objectives, and that was to return the buildings back into active long-term use, to facilitate uses that are sympathetic to the building's history and heritage, to deliver an exemplary conservation project, and our social objectives to promote uses that address community needs, to positively contribute to regeneration in the local area, to broaden awareness of and access to the building's history and heritage, and to deliver a community skills legacy through the project. And our financial objective was to create a fundable project that delivers a long-term operational surplus, so i.e. robust business plan. And the positives of approaching a project with these strategic project objectives is absolutely everyone on your project team is on board with what you want to achieve. And these objectives carry through everything else you do in the next stages of your project. And to build then on to one particular aspect of our project, I'm afraid I can't go into detail of all of the things that we did, but this is specifically about involving the community. And building on what Rosie said, community consultation is absolutely integral. It's not a tag on, it's not something that you think about towards the end or you do to sort of to try and justify what you want to achieve. It is something you have to consider from the very, very outset. And it should be a collaborative approach. So you have to think about, you know, whether it's open and whether it's accessible to a wide range of people. And what's really helpful is to agree your consultation methodology at the outset of the project. And so we did this working with Nicola and our community consultant, Debbie Radcliffe. And that means that you understand from the beginning how your community consultation fits into all the other aspects of your project, because all of these things obviously are interlinked. One of the really important points I'd like to impart is that it's really important to understand the local community and identify where people or groups may be difficult to reach. So it was our business planner who was doing the market research and starting to help us understand what the communities of Edmonton look like. Of course, you're pulling on the knowledge of key stakeholders in the local area. And then on the back of that, you can help form your community consultation methodology. Use of digital tools was really helpful for us because we did our project over the pandemic, so we created a virtual tour. And then at any point when you're talking about consultation, it's really important to understand the limitations of that consultation, where you might have missed groups, where you haven't had the reach that you intended, so that you can pick that up in later stages of your project. And then just to have a final note to consider GDPR in all of your consultation activities. And what I've just put here is the flyer, which was developed, led by Nicola, with input from myself and the community consultant, Debbie, which had a range of different ways that people could engage in sharing their ideas for our project. Oops, sorry. And I'm afraid I didn't include all the data about the consultation responses, but I just wanted to share very quickly where we sent it. So, we were using some digital methods, so social media and websites, but we were also using some more traditional non-digital methods as well to reach people who otherwise digitally excluded. And so that was through the parish newsletter, through the Enfield Society, and then what Debbie called her foot soldier work, which was on the ground, trooping around Edmonton Green, leaving flyers in shops, talking to people on the street, engaging with people in the locality, putting up posters to have a more physical presence in the local area. Now, out of our community consultation came a number of key themes which are included on our report. And just to pick up on some of these, focus on education was really strong, creating a community hub. Health and well-being, the garden came through really surprisingly strongly. People really wanted to have green space, celebrating the building's history, providing a place for young people. And of course, you take all this data and you take it in hand with the other work that you're doing as part of your options appraisal study. So that's, this is understanding your building, this is a condition, this is understanding your heritage, this is business planning. And you start to shortlist your options. And our business planner identified 3 critical factors that we used for shortlisting our options. And that was the qualitative merits, which linked to our strategic project objectives, a financial assessment and an assessment of risk. And going through this shortlisting process, we came through with 2, there we are. Option A was a partnership between our trust and a charity called Learning for Life charity, who I'll explain a bit more about in a moment. And option B, a community hall and a residence. So are you creating a residential house in the cottage and a community hall in the charity hall building? Now, I don't have time to go through this in detail, but we had these 2 options which came through, which we're exploring in more detail in our report. And in assessing these, we discussed them with key stakeholders, with potential partners, to understand their input and thoughts, particularly the consultees. So Nicola sent the information to Historic England and Enfield Council to get their feedback. And then what the project team did was assess each option against our strategic project objectives. And this is where those objectives are so key to identifying your vision for your project. And through this process, which was lengthy and complex in its own right, we identified our preferred option, and that was a partnership between our Trust and Learning for Life charity. So this charity is a local charity. It provides opportunities for children and young people with learning difficulties and special educational needs, or who've been affected by illness, disability or poverty. And just to give you a real overview of why this came through as our preferred option. And firstly, it was a really clearly defined end user and a strong potential for a project partnership. This represented an established local charity with the potential to grow their social enterprise activities, which would be supported by a base in the local area. The educational use of the building would link to the heritage of the site. It would also retain the site as a single building, so the cottage and the hall together, and there was a real sense that if we split the building up, it would have a big impact on the heritage significance of the site. And there was an established local need for youth provision. It would also create community space that could be accessed by wider community groups and people. And one of the key aspects of our project is that it provides training, volunteering and work opportunities for particularly disadvantaged young people in Enfield. So there's a really high level of social impact we can deliver through this project. It will support wider regeneration, it engages wider audiences of local heritage, it supports our ambition for a community skills legacy. The end use will help support funding, so it fits in, say, with major funds like the Heritage Fund. And what we have here is a viable business model. So what does our project actually look like? So this is Nicola's outline of the plan of the building and how it's going to be used. I'm sorry, it's the other way up to our other plans. But at the top, you've got the main charity hall building, the front and rear rooms of Mistress's Cottage, and the meeting room in the centre there. And then we've got two extensions, so a kitchen extension at the back of the cottage and a disabled toilet extension just to the west end of the main hall. And over on the right-hand side, you've got this breakdown, which was provided by Learning for Life charity. And this shows us how the building is going to be used. So the cafe is the sort of core activity there. That's providing catering and training for their students and for young people. You've got the main hall, which is facilitated again by young people, which can have a variety of different uses. You've got a garden, which is all about growing, and a meeting room. And I mean, we've put in here potential use in the evenings, but this is ongoing in discussion with the planning department, if that's viable. So at the end of our options appraisal project, we had an awful lot to digest. And the first thing that we did was for us to take all this information back and bring it back to our trustees to make sure that our organisation was on board with the project that was being proposed. And there was a very, very strong positive response from them that this could be a viable project. And at that point, and this is where we are now, so this is live and in action stuff that we're talking about, is developing our own project vision. So what we did is to create this sort of information leaflet, and that's because we really needed to start sharing information. That's both our charity and our partnering charity, Learning for Life charity, to secure wider partnerships, share it with key stakeholders, start to be able to share it to project funders, so that there's a clear expression of what we want to achieve in the project. So everything in terms of our project vision is directly built on all of the work that was done by Nicola and the project team in our options appraisal enhancement report. And in some ways we're taking that action plan that they gave us at the end and refining that into our project vision. Now this bit of work was actually quite quick, and that was kind of forced. Our hand was forced a little bit because we needed to start engaging in particular into funding streams that opportunities have cropped up over the last few months. And so this has been an iterative process between our trust and particular members of our board and the Learning for Life charity. And this is the first time we're sharing this information widely. So our project is called The Life in the Community at the Charity School, Edmonton. And that's the name of the business plan and that our partner AIM charity, Learning for Life charity, want to deliver at the site. And in a single sentence, our project is saving an old school to help a new generation of young people in Enfield flourish. I'm just going to read the first bit of our sort of overarching vision, and that's that the London Historic Building Trust and Learning for Life charity are working together to regenerate this historic former charity school so that it can once again provide learning, training and employment opportunities for young people in Enfield. And it goes out, so what you've got there is 100 words. That's our sort of extended project vision. So where we are to build on what Rosie was explaining earlier is we're now looking at understanding and expressing our outputs and outcomes better. So for the purposes of this leaflet, what we've done is we put our outputs under what we'll deliver. This is the bricks and mortar, this is the reuses, this is the heritage buildings back in use. And then our outcomes we've expressed as what we've achieved. So this is a more qualitative information about what our project is going to achieve. And this is really just to impart it in very early stages to garner support for our project. But what we're doing now is doing what Rosie will definitely push me to do, which is actually to get that clear quantitative information and start to put together this matrix. So when we're going to funders, it's very clear what our input, output and outcomes are of this project. So very quickly, the most important bit is our lessons learned. So what I would really stress is that understanding community and local need as early as possible is absolutely fundamental. If you have the budget to do so, a community audit in advance of your viability stage work can be incredibly helpful. But if not, if you are a community member, doing as much work as you can to help your project team can be great. So identifying key stakeholders and identifying need in the community, starting to put together that information to impart to your project team to build their project from. Developing strong relationships with key stakeholders as early as possible is absolutely fundamental. So that big stage pre-project where we're working with the trustee, Historic England, all these local groups, we're building those relationships and we've brought them along our whole project so that they are all on board with what we're doing now. Crucially, appoint a project team who can work effectively together and a lead consultant who can coordinate the teams into a comprehensive study. And that's what Nicola did for us, is to bring together all of those threads to identify this preferred option that we can really buy into and feel that we can deliver. And just repeating, embedding your vision into the briefs and tender so the project team know what you want to achieve. Community consultation, fundamental. It has to be at the heart of what you want to do. And then finding the time to work together to develop a project vision. And I think that's something that, I think that we need to do now, actually, to really cement this project vision amongst our project partners. So just to end, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been involved in our project, which represent a huge number of people, and particularly to all of the community members that took the time to share their ideas with us. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola, who can build on or challenge even what I've said in the project now.
Hello.
Hi, Nicola.
So it's always very quite quite. I haven't quite got this whole Zoom thing, but I'd just like to say a really warm hello, and I'm really glad that people have turned out to hear about what the trust is doing, and I feel totally humbled now that I was actually ever involved in this job. In one step, let's say one step of the journey. And I think what I'd first like to say, before we even come on to like what I do or the team and how we all came together, is just say that if you are starting out on a project, it's so important to work out what is really special. It might be the place, it might be the need, it might be the people around it. Obviously, we're all here because we're interested in historic buildings, but there's so much more actually to these buildings than the bricks and mortar. And this little school, this charity school, and that place is a very, very special place. It's started out, at a time of great need when girls weren't getting education. There was a philanthropist, he made this school. It's been serving the community on and off, all this, like we're talking hundreds of years, and it's ended up as a kind of sad corner that people kind of walk past or slightly notice or what's going to happen. And behind it is this great swell of support coming from the borough, from the local school, and the fact that this school has come forward as a preferred option. They are absolutely fantastic people, and they worked so hard to make this option be sort of informed. So much, they brought forward so much evidence, and on the community engagement, they had a schools event, and the school children, these are children who, leaving school, will be an absolutely huge and scary event. I mean, they're dealing with children who have very, very few social skills, and they're very isolated often. Anyway, these children sat down, we had to set up the ideas, Debbie in particular, and they sat down and made their model and so on. And they come up with the most extraordinary things like, oh, the cottage should be a place where we can learn how to run a home, the hall, we can do all these arty things and all the rest of it in it. And they're just immediately bursting with ideas. I would say, always ask the children. After all, it will be their building. It will take us adults years to get anything together for them. So ask them, and ask them early on. And if their ideas are a bit off the wall, well, that's fine too. There's usually a nugget. Now, I would like to quote this is one of the trustees from the school. And I was trying to tease out what they were talking about and what their thoughts were of the place. And it was like putting me in my place. He said it could be a wonderful place to visit in Edmonton, not just a hall, but a suite of activities. And he was the man who put together that, the slide with the day that we had morning to night, and we had each part of the building. I had to analyse the building. The building had a hall, it had a cottage, and it had a rear classroom, and try and imagine the activities going on in it. And that's why that plan is actually colour-coded between what he saw going on in the day and what might happen. So this is a marrying up of needs and the building and testing it out. Because on the one hand, we had a very, very historically sensitive cottage with panelling and so on. On the other, you've got this hall, which is very run down. So I would just like to say a little word about the team. I personally took a big risk on this, the tender, because I said, if you want to work with me, I want to work with Jim at 4th Street, I want to work with Debbie, I want to work with Ian, and I want to work with Ed. And these are all absolutely top people, and they all have connections, either working singly or together, whatever, but they are all absolutely brilliant. And having a really good supportive team like that, I think that was really brilliant. And each discipline really informing the other. So that was very, very good. So I think I've only allowed 5 minutes and no slides. So I think I've probably done my 5 minutes.
So I'm not picking up where I left off. I'm going right back to the beginning of our project and asking the question which Niall helpfully covered, which is why an options appraisal enhancement as opposed to anything else. And very simply, it's because there was an options appraisal done in 2012. So we didn't want to start completely from scratch. We wanted to build on the findings of that report and review and refresh them. And then again, to build on what I said, at this point, we're starting and we don't have an end use identified. So for us, we really need to explore a range of potential options. And that's particularly important for us because we are a trust which is good at saving historic buildings, but we don't go on and manage them. And also just to sort of stress as well that whilst our trust, it was founded as a revolving fund trust, as part of our Resilient Heritage project, we're looking at a new kind of model, which is much more to do with creating a portfolio of sites. So what we're looking at here is a transfer to our site and then renting it out to a potential partner. So we want to identify new options, so things which were not explored in the 2012 study, and potential partnership arrangements, and this is about securing this long-term future. And really crucially, the 2012 study didn't undertake very much community consultation, so this was something we absolutely wanted to embed in our review of that study, refresh of that study, and because as has been expressed, that's absolutely fundamental to identifying an actually viable and responsive use. And for us as well, it's about testing options to identify that preferred option. So for us as a trust, before we consider actually acquiring ownership of a site, we want to be really, really confident that there's a viable and robust project that is there, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're progressing a transfer of an asset, but actually it ends up being a liability. So this options appraisal enhancement is absolutely fundamental, and I suppose it just builds on what everyone before me has said, is that really committing to this early stage work is absolutely fundamental. The better understanding that you have at this stage, the better the project is as you go forward, and the better grounding that you have as an organisation to actually take on the asset and progress that project in the first place. So just some very quick resources, the Heritage Trust Network Toolkit, and there's a link to viability, feasibility stages, and it hopefully breaks down some of the differences. And also the Architectural Heritage Fund has a really useful viability report template and guidance, which isn't on their website, but we have a copy, and also I'm sure Laura Williams at the AHF Fund, who's the support officer, who's talking next week, can share it with you. So looking at our specific options appraisal project, unfortunately, it's not on the massive scale of Cardigan Castle or the projects that Niall were talking about. It's a much more limited but not insubstantial project. So the way that we tendered it was we had two separate briefs. The first was for our lead consultant. And for us, we wanted our lead consultant to be a conservation architect. We wanted someone who was really experienced in understanding historic buildings and had experience in options appraisal projects. And we wanted that lead consultant to be the coordinator for the whole project team. And within that tender, we wanted the lead consultant to nominate a structural engineer and a quantity surveyor. So that's more of the building team, I suppose. And then our second tender was for the business planner and community consultant, which is self-explanatory really. But what's really fundamental is that we don't want people working in different directions. And building on what Nicola said, it's about having this cohesive team that are working together. So I just tried to put together an organogram, and I didn't share this with Nicola, and I'd be interested to see what her reflection is on how the actual project structure operated. But essentially at the heart, you've got your lead consultant who's coordinating your whole project team. They're all the different members, and this isn't a fixed list. This is the team of people that you need to deliver your particular feasibility or options appraisal study. And then there's us, there's the client, and in this case that was represented by me as a project manager. You've got your stakeholders that we did a lot of work building relationships with, that are then liaising with the lead consultant. And then the lead consultant is liaising with the consultees, so Historic England and the local planning authority. And then of course there's a wider community, the lead consultant and the community consultant are working together with input from us to build this community engagement. Now, this organogram is not exhaustive, and for projects like this, they are in reality much more complex. What I've just done is I've taken some sections out from the brief for our lead consultant, just to give a sense of what we're asking for when we're tendering for the lead consultant for a study such as this. So earlier I showed you the objectives. We also included a little bit about the requirements, so what we wanted, and I won't go through it all in detail, but one of the key requirements, which is the bottom one here, is that the final study should provide a clear strategy to take a capital project forward. That's the end goal of undertaking this bit of work, is we want to know what the next steps are, and we want to understand if there's a viable project. And equally, if there's no viable project, as Niall said, you want to look at a range of different options and be realistic. And if your study at the end says that there isn't a viable project here in this particular way, you need to assess that. And then the output. So it's quite helpful to explain exactly what you want from this bit of work. And again, I won't go through it all here, but it's just listing what we required from our lead consultant to deliver as part of our project. Now, actually, having spoken quite a lot, I haven't really introduced our project team. So how did we get to a project team? Well, we did an appointment based on an open tender process. So we advertised on our website and through the Heritage Alliance Heritage Update. And because it was a grant funded project, we had a fixed price budget. And because it was, we weren't tendering based on price, we did an evaluation that was 100% on a quality assessment. And we identified three, in this instance, lead consultants, three to interview. And we agreed a set of questions and assessment criteria with our grant funders and some of our key stakeholders, so everyone was on board with the process of appointing our project team. And I think it's really important to stress that your tender process must be transparent and robust, and particularly for a grant funded project. So grant funders will have very clear ideas about how they want your tender to be undertaken. It tends to be a little, I suppose, more relaxed at this early stage, but it's really, I think, important to think about that, how you approach that process, to make sure that your grant funders are very clear about how you've appointed your team. And then, you want a project team that's got demonstrable experience and that shows a really good understanding of your project when they respond to your tender. So asking for them to submit their methodology, for example, can be a good way of understanding how much they've grasped from the brief you've given them. So our team was led by Nicola, who's joining us today. Ed Morton at the Morton Partnership was our structural engineer. Ian Walker of Walker Associates was our QS, a quantity surveyor. Jim Roberts at Fourth Street was our business planner, and Debbie Radcliffe was our community consultant. Now, what I've just done, and Nicola, I hope you didn't mind, I just took out from Nicola's a methodology that was given to us. And I think it's a really, really sort of good overview of why we felt confident in the project team that was being proposed by Nicola. And actually, it really reflects exactly what Niall was saying about the different stages of your options appraisal project. So when we were looking at the tender proposals, we could really see that Nicola and the team had really grasped what we wanted. And what was also quite helpful for us as the client is down here this little activity table which showed who in the team was doing what and getting a sense of these interdependencies. So to really stress, we don't want your business planner to be operating completely separately. All of these things have to fit together. And that leads me into looking at the project programme. So I appreciate that on the screen you probably can't read much here, so it's really just an illustration. And to stress that trying to rush through these projects is not beneficial, I suppose, because you want this project to consider these interdependencies is you need the time for different strands of your project to come together. And so what you've got here is the red is your understanding, the orange is your sort of evaluating options, and I've forgotten what your headings are, Nicola, sorry, and the green is your delivering. And this is where we started when Nicola was appointed. So this was after the pandemic started, and a programme of about 4 months. And just to give an idea of how flexibility is, and our stress was really important, what our programme actually looked like as we were heading towards completion. And you can see that different aspects of the project are sort of stretching out. The in principle breakdown of your 3 stages are still there, but actually, particularly for things like consultation over the pandemic, we simply needed more time to undertake that and make sure that we were reaching people. And also at the point that we had a draft report, we just simply needed more time to get the feedback before finalising it. Just to look again very briefly at the budget, and this goes back to what Hannah was saying just a moment ago. So we applied to the Architectural Heritage Fund through their current Transforming Places Through Heritage grant funding, and we applied for the maximum amount of their project viability grant, which is £15,000, and we secured that. And we also applied to the Heritage Fund. So when they rejigged their grant programme a few years ago, they've come up with their small, medium and large grants programme. And to really stress that the small grants programme is brilliant. The process is easier, more straightforward than lots of their other grant programmes. It's fairly, I suppose, manageable. There's lots of things that you can bring in-house. There's lots of resources on their website to help you deliver that. So we applied for the maximum funding of £9,900. And part of the reason that we approach the big funders at this stage is that we tend to want to save the little funders for the later project stages. When we're looking at securing big money, we don't want to exhaust our pots. So we do as much as we can with, I suppose, with the as few funders as possible at this stage. So our total budget was 24,900. And whatever way you look at this, for these kind of projects, you can just never raise enough money to do everything that ideally you would need to. So this is, again, where flexibility is really important. And what I've just tried to do here is show what our approved project budget was when we started and where we ended up. And to stress that the pandemic did also have an impact on the way that we spent our budget. So some of the key things to note here, so obviously the virtual tour and the building scanning, we've pushed ahead to the beginning of the project, and we had to find funding for that. And we included an evaluation survey, which was to do with resolving the ownership, printed materials for community consultation, and then a tree survey. So this was something that you would look at as an item that you would like to fund, but that we just simply couldn't squeeze into the budget at the beginning. And then to make our new budget work, some of the things that we had to take out. So the activity budget, because everything went online, actually we could do a lot of our activities in a different way. So we could do our open day. We did our workshop with the school virtually. And actually, so our costs for that came down considerably. The evaluation consultant. So ideally, we'd like to appoint an external evaluation consultant who can be objective about the evaluation and help us as we go through the project, reflect on it. But actually, we took that in-house because we needed that money that was allocated for the evaluation consultant to cover some of the costs that had cropped up. And then the contingency, I can't stress enough that having a really, even when your project budgets are tight, make sure that you have a decent contingency in there, because there will always be things crop up in these projects that you need to find funding for. In an ideal world, if I was going to sit down and put down a project budget for an options appraisal, there are lots of things that I would like to include, things like access studies, our arboriculture reports, environmental studies. But what we find as a trust, because we don't have all the funding there, we have to think very carefully about the requirements of our project, and then think about how to make it fit within our budget. So it's a lot of juggling in terms of finances, and I'm sure many other people and organisations will find a similar thing. So giving that flexibility in terms of contingencies is incredibly valuable. This whole process is incredibly iterative, so we go back and forth throughout the project, but I really want to just focus in on one particular point in the project. And this is at the point when we're developing the option A. And what I want to just talk through is how some of the work that we did through the scoping, this options appraisal project, impacted on the development of our preferred option. So the first way that our scoping work impacted was with engagement through our emerging preferred partner, and that was with Learning for Life. So Nicola and the project team spent quite a lot of time talking to the Learning for Life charity to understand how they're going to use the building. And there's lots of things to do with the kind of young people that will be using the building that impact on the way that we think about the site being used. And of course, fundamentally engaging with your statutory consultees and getting really early stage advice from the local authority and Historic England is absolutely valuable. So this is pre-application advice that we're seeking. And because we've brought these key stakeholders along with us on this journey from the beginning, we were able to ask them for this, I suppose, informal early stage advice on our emerging proposals. The tree survey, so I'll show you in a second on the plan that suddenly this tree became incredibly important, and that related to the approach to structural engineering and associated costs. So we absolutely had to have this report done and turn it around rather quickly. A review of the cost plan, and I feel like I probably drove Nicola rather mad with looking at the project costs and thinking about, what was essential and what was desired in our project to make a project that would be fundable ultimately. And then accessibility, and looking back in reflection, I think doing an accessibility audit really early on in the project would have been quite beneficial to us. But at the stage we didn't actually have the funding, and we're now looking at how we can secure the funding to do that accessibility audit. But obviously, when you're looking at a publicly accessible building, when you're looking at something which is servicing the community, accessibility is fundamental. So what I have here is just two of the drawings. On the right hand side is the drawing I showed you earlier, which is our concept design that we're taking forward now to development stage. But on the left hand side, I just want to show you one of Nicola's early drawings when we were starting to work through some of the aspects of the design. And if I just go through very quickly some of them here. So the accessibility, we were looking at ramp access up the side of the building. And because of the multi-development of the site, you've got different levels in every single part of the building, which is extremely difficult to navigate in terms of accessibility. So looking at these ramp access, a lift on one side through the centre, I can't use my cursor to show you, but in the centre of the left-hand side drawing, what was emerging was the need for this sort of lobby area to become a bit of an access hub, so that could provide level access to all areas of the building. And then on the left-hand side, you've got the garden room down at the bottom. And this was, a really desired aspect, but the costs associated with the inclusion of a garden room became extremely high. So we discussed with Nicola about omitting that garden room and thinking about a slightly different project to deliver that. And then the basement, there is a lovely basement there, and we thought that would be great for some additional toilets, but again the costs of those toilets became extremely high, so we were looking at using that basement space as cafe store rather than toilets. So this isn't exhaustive, but if I just flip over here, you can see how the impact of some of the scoping work impacted on our final design. So instead of having ramps, we've got level access and an additional lift. The oak tree, our arboriculture report indicated that we'd need to have piled foundations, so we incorporated that into our planning and our costing. And then one of the, these fundamental things, so when we were thinking about the cafe, we thought about our cafe counter being in the rear room, but discussion with Learning for Life charity, they said, no, our counter's got to be in the front room because this is on the street. We want people to come into this counter. So these are the kinds of discussions that came through our scoping work. And you can, it looks like a fairly simple plan, but I think Nicola will agree that actually every single detail of this has come through, a very considered and a detailed process with multiple discussions and multiple impacts. So lessons learned. Again, include sufficient contingency in your project budget. I can't stress that enough. And include an allowance for legal advice. As I said earlier, that's also an incredibly important thing to include. And obviously, if you don't need it for legal advice, then you can reallocate it elsewhere within your budget. Appointing the right project team is absolutely fundamental. So you've got to be confident that they have the skills and experience to do what you want them to. Agree a clear methodology and project milestones at the start. Involve stakeholders as a project development, and that's your project partners and statutory consultees, because their input into these emerging preferred options and preferred option is absolutely fundamental. And then accessibility, and that's a really key one for us, and I think going forward embedding that accessibility and accessibility audits for this kind of project is something that I'll think about how we do more effectively. So again, it's just to say thank you to everyone. and to hand over to Nicola to see if there's anything she can add to that very brief overview of our scoping.
Right. Well, what a brilliant breakdown. So very succinctly done. And I thought that's a fantastic presentation from Niall. Really, if you follow Niall's footsteps, your project will definitely go in the right direction. I think one of the points that keeps on being made is the length of time for these projects, very long time. And we started with, it was called an options appraisal enhancement, and because something had been done in 2012, pretty much none of which could go forward, even though perhaps some of the previous projects seemed like obvious way forward. I would think it's fair to say, Rosie, that absolutely everything was interrogated, and the outcome that we came up with wasn't necessarily obvious, because I think the obvious outcome was splitting the cottage and the hall for income, long-term income, and then, renting a bit out. But at the end of the day, the options appraisal showed that really didn't work on all sorts of different levels, which I won't bother you with. But the message is that maybe the obvious is not the outcome that you actually is going to happen, or actually be the best for that place. It's about, I'd just like to reiterate what other people have been saying. This is about a project. This is about something much bigger than buildings and conservation and architecture. And from day one, if in the consultation, or I'd rather say engagement, offering, I think fundamental is offering people out there who care about this place and will be involved far longer before and after anybody involved in it, is when on our flyer, which I put here, is how could you contribute to this project? So you're asking about reactions to what you see, what we found out, what we can tell you about. At some consultation will be, we think we might do it this way, what do you think? Or others might be, we don't know what we're doing, what do you think? You have to be very careful and know where you're pitching that. But I think now, having a few projects now, is what could you contribute, and be open to that. Because on one job, which was a barracks, somebody came forward, there were terrible youth problems in the area, a listed chapel, and they've put in a skate park which literally uses the space within the building. They literally use the space, and that building suckers that, and it wasn't something people thought at the beginning, when it was such a big problem to have a garrison chapel with no use. And I would also say on that, it's this fundamental thing of sustainability in the long term. It's physical, it's financial, and it's social, and these things have got to come together for the long term. And on the programme, talking about time, the only thing I'll say about our programme, it's really important to have, if you like, your synoptic chart, like the weather. So you've got your lows and your highs, and you think it's going to come. And 9 times out of 10, forecasting is really, really accurate now. But the timing of when it happens isn't quite always as it works out. So I'd say at the beginning of the project, if I may, when your consultant gives you a programme, they're doing it the best they can, and this will need to be adapted. I don't know, I don't want to come across like I'm lecturing, but our programme looked like this most of the time, because we're adapting all the time to, we can't get into the place for 3 weeks, we can't, and I completely underestimated the time it would take for the client organisation, which they may have their own cycles of meetings and stuff. Your consultant won't know what they are at the start. So this isn't about lecturing, but I would encourage you to really scrutinise a programme which is made by someone who doesn't understand everything, but may, like the synoptic chart, have a good idea about, we need to explore the building, we need to develop our ideas, we need to come back to you with a preferred option. So that overall pattern will work. Yeah, I think it's been a really good day actually, and I hope everyone comes away with some really good things on it. And actually, I hope that you all look out for the Edmonton project as well, because behind it is it's a bit like honest, you know, the projects which Niall said. There's so much wanting and willing and community ownership at a very deep level that can come out and will nurture these projects. And that's engagement and a long-term commitments what really makes it worthwhile and will bring it through. It will deliver in the end.